Obstacles and Innovations, What's Changed for Email Marketing in 2019. Before we get started, I just want to run through a few items. We will be recording today's webinar, and each attendee will receive a link to the recording shortly after the event. I also want to point out that in the handout section, there is a slide handout. You will see DMD, Obstacles, Innovations, Email, so you can go to the handout section to download a PDF of today's presentation as well. We certainly welcome your questions. Please submit them at any time during the webinar, and we'll try to address them as they come up. But we've also saved time at the end of today's session for Q&A. If you do want to submit a question, please use the Q&A function at the right side of your screen. You should see Q&A, polls, handouts right there. And we will use the Q&A feature to not only track your questions, but also record your questions. So in the event that we are not able to get to your question today, we will follow up with you after today's webinar. And always, you can reach us at info@dmdconnects.com. So if you have a question following the event and you want to reach out to us, you can send us an email directly there. You can also respond to me directly from the emails that you're receiving about BigMarketer. They come from my email address. So with that, I would like to introduce you to today's speaker, Jared Rickard. Jared has a vast experience in email marketing, automation, analytics, and as such, he's the Senior Director of Product Management for Email at DMD. His knowledge of all things email encompasses managing email deployments, establishing email marketing automation programs, and leading creative design for digital campaigns. In his 14+ years in HCP marketing, Jared has developed and deployed thousands of successful email campaigns. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jared.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate the warm introduction, and thank you to everyone who's attending. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to come hear from us on some new obstacles that we've seen occur just in the last couple months, and then taking a look also at some innovations and solutions to these obstacles. I'm going to give a couple caveats up front. The obstacles, particularly the first obstacle that we're going to talk about today, is still evolving. And so it's very new and very cutting edge. And so we're still learning about it. But we'd love to bring those learnings to you. And so we're going to do that today. The other thing I'm going to say here up front is that we're digging into some very technical topics. So God willing, I will be able to present these to you in a way that is very relatable. So diving in, again, we're going to be looking first at obstacles that we've seen pop up, two in particular. And then we're going to be looking at some innovations that I think we can bring to bear. Some of these are brand new, and some of these just require us to look at them in a new way. We will get to those innovations at or about slide 19, and we'll dig into them in depth. So with that said, as Sarah mentioned, I believe, we did a webinar back in February, and that webinar was focused on deliverability. And one, we got a lot of requests to dig deeper into that. And so this kind of ended up being a natural fit. But as well, right after that webinar is when we began to see the first obstacle occur and these changes occur. So I'm going to look back to that first webinar, and I'm going to redefine one of the topics that we defined for that first webinar, which is, what is deliverability? Some people would define deliverability as the delivery of an email to an ISP. Other people might define deliverability as the placement of the email in the inbox by the ISP. Again, for today, just like in February, we are going to define this as the likelihood of an email being delivered to an actual inbox. So not just good enough to get it there, but needed to get into the inbox.
And the slide presentation from that webinar is in your handout section as well, just to confirm. We have a recording of that event that we can send you as well. The file size is a little large for us to share here, but we absolutely can provide that webinar with you. We can send you to a link or the actual file. So please just let us know if you'd like to see it. It's also will be on our website under our resources section.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, if you want to dig in more at a high level on deliverability, that is a great webinar for doing that. So with that said, our first obstacle that we've seen happen really starting in mid-February, is this idea of relational filters. And these relational filters have popped up in a new way. They've been there for a while, but they've popped up in a new way at places like Gmail and Yahoo and AOL. So for any of you who are emailing into those email addresses, I know we are, you probably have seen some changes in your deliverability rates. And when this type of thing happens for us, literally at my deliverability team, we see any kind of change in inbox delivery or filtering, and we pull the fire alarm, red flashing lights and alarms go off. So it is a big deal, and I want to share a little bit more with you about it. So as I said, starting in about mid-February, Gmail made a change where they started to reprioritize relationship over reputation with regards to email delivery. So looking at the relationship that a sender has with the recipient's inbox. And then in March, following suit, Yahoo and AOL adopted a similar algorithm. And looking back to last year, Gmail made some filter changes roughly in February last year. And so I'm going to be a little bit prophetic here, and I'm going to say that I think what we are going to see here in 2019 is that those changes are going to spread forward into other places, because that's exactly what happened last year, was that over time, these changes made their way into places even like Barracuda, which is the firewall that is behind our Outlook Exchange server. So I think that is probably what is going to happen. So traditionally, what is a relationship filter or relational filter? Well, the place it was originally used or created for was Gmail's inbox folder structure. So if you think about your Gmail inbox, I think most of us have a Gmail. I surveyed that in the last webinar, and I think the overwhelming majority of people have a Gmail address. You have these different folders, and the relationship filter was originally put in place to tell Gmail where the email should land once it got accepted into the inbox. Did it belong in the promotions folder or the primary folder or the social folder? And it looked at characteristics of the email to see whether the email appeared to be personal or not. And it also looked at what kind of responses had the end user taken with previous emails from the sender. So that was its original intent. And traditionally speaking, now Gmail, Yahoo, AOL, no one ever releases their algorithms or how they do their filtering. It's kind of a super secret thing. For Gmail, for example, they change their filter hourly, just slightly, so that you can never really figure out exactly what's going on with it. But traditionally speaking, what we've seen is that it was about 70% reputation based. And this is things like your sender score, whether you've appeared on blacklists or whether you've been hitting spam traps or you're emailing soft bounces continually. And then 30%, it was looking at the relationship, were there opens, were there clicks, was there website activity after the fact? And then kind of the trump card in the relationship would be replies. Address that right off the get-go. In promotional marketing, we're not often looking for a reply. And in fact, especially in a regulated space, we may not want to reply at all. So I don't think we can aim for that. But these first two, the opens, clicks, reads, and website activity, I think are something that we can aim to increase in order to deal with these relationship filters. And what we saw here in February is actually a flip-flop. And what it looks like now is that they are prioritizing the relationship at about a 60-40 ratio. So they're looking more at the relationship today than they necessarily are looking at the reputation. This could lead us to a number of conclusions, one of which would be, I need to focus almost solely on their relationship. I think that would be a misstep. I think what we have to look at here is we have to have the reputation portion of this 100% buttoned up. We need all of that 40%. So we still need to be extremely concerned with our IP reputation, sender score. We don't want to hit blacklists. We never want to hit spam traps. We want to deal with our non-responders and our soft bouncers immediately, and we certainly want no hard bounces. But then, now we're also going to have to really prioritize sending very engaging content, stuff that we're sure is going to get an open or a click or a read. We're going to have to adjust the type of emails that we build, and we're going to have to deal with making them feel more personal or emulating personal email. So digging into what is this reputational filter? what goes into this reputational filter? The last bullet point on here really kind of sums it up. Traditionally speaking, a reputation filter was there to look for threats in the email. And again, it's going to look at things like your daily volume, whether your IT has set your sending domain up properly, all the feedback loops in place. Some of the other things here, you're going to look at the content type. This is the traditional filter where we would look at a spam score for an email. Does it have a bunch of $signs in the subject line? It's going to check all the links and make sure that they're not threatening in any way, shape, or form. But its intent really is to stop malicious behavior from occurring. And then as we look at what is the relational filter or relationship filter, this is really there now today to filter non-personal email. And it's looking at, again, past behavior. What has occurred in the past? Have you sent this email 10 times and no one's ever interacted with anything from you? It's gonna look for personal attributes in the email. Does this email look personal? Does it look like an email that one person would send to another person, like a friend? And so again, that can give us some directional data of what we might need to adjust in our email. And what its real intent here is to filter emails that appear to be unwanted promotion. That's its genuine intent. It wants to make sure that there's no unwanted promotions coming to the inbox. So I think in order to dig into this and truly understand what we might need to do, we have to look at why. Why would they do this? And why would they make this change? For myself, I know I often feel like Gmail's just trying to spoil my day, or they've got something against me as a marketer. But that's actually not true. Why are they doing this? They're doing this because they're wanting to create a great user experience for their users, just like we want to do. And because they are in a competitive environment, Yahoo is competing with Gmail, Gmail's competing with AOL. They all want share of market with their email software and inboxes. They want to create the best user experience for their end users. And so, of course, when we open our inbox, we want to find email that is relevant to us. And we want to find email that we want to open and read and engage with. And so as they try to provide that user experience, what we can do to start to overcome these filters is create an experience that is good for the end user, or perfect for the end user, or relevant to the end user, in order to help overcome these filters. And if we can do that, then the filters will not filter us out. All right, moving on to the second obstacle. This is another kind of filter. I want to caveat or state right up front, this is a totally different kind of filter. We've seen changes in recent months with hospital filters, and these filters are less about where to put an email and more about whether to let an email in at all. And these filters are much more like a wall, potentially, than they are like a sorting system. So one of the most famous ones, or most common ones that we see at the hospital, is something called Barracuda networks. It's a hardware platform that you would run behind your Outlook Exchange server. And there's other ones like Spam Assassin that oftentimes hospitals will use as well. And again, this represents more of a wall and more of a challenge for us in some ways than the new filtering systems at Gmail. So when we look at these hospital filters, what we used to see was that, you would see your emails get sent, and, the bulk of them would get delivered. Some might get filtered if your content was really bad, you potentially would not get in. But, for a lot of hospital systems, they were allowing most email to come in from known outside providers. Today, what we've started to see is that there are hospital systems that are outright blocking an email from coming in from any outside vendor. And the problem we run into here is that there's no obvious immediate way to tell that this is occurring. So in our example here that we're showing, say you're sending 100,000 records to each of these hospitals, you're going to see that 100% of them are getting basically delivered. And the problem with that is then you figure, well, my campaign went well because it all got delivered. But what we see in the reporting is with some of the hospital systems, when you actually go look at it over time, you're never getting an actual response. So you're never getting an open and you're never getting any clicks. And the reason for this is that the firewall is letting the email in initially, but then it is literally holding it back and not delivering it to any inboxes. And these hospitals are putting these rules in place for very good reasons. They want to make sure that there are no loopholes for which anyone can access the HIPAA data that they have behind their firewall. They don't want anyone to steal their data. And so they're putting rules in place, literally like, if I don't know the sender and don't have a whitelist relationship with them, I'm just not going to allow the email in. And again, some of this has to do with promotional email, but in other cases, it's literally, we're just not going to let the email in. And so there's really only one solution for this particular obstacle, which is whitelisting. And whitelisting is the process by which you set up with the end user or the hospital. You give them the list of your IP addresses and they say that they are all safe and will allow email in. Now, this process is long and arduous. I know because we are whitelisted with over 80 hospital systems in the United States, some of the biggest ones. But it's a very tough process to go through. So if you're doing your own sending, you literally have to call the hospital IT. Oftentimes they require you to present a packet of examples of the kind of email that you're sending, proof that this would be valuable to the physicians that are practicing within their hospital system. And, it involves many conversations, so it can take months. But the important thing here is that you need to go back and look at all of your email response data and campaign reports, if you're doing your own sending, to see, are you literally flat out blocked in any hospital systems? Now, assuming you get beyond this, or you're dealing with a hospital that's not blocking you entirely, we see a second hurdle that's come up with these hospital filters. And that hurdle is called non-human traffic, or NHT as we call it. This is, again, a very new thing and an emerging trend. This non-human traffic is basically bot traffic or automated traffic. And the reason this NHT exists is, again, part of these networks and firewalls, they're looking at the emails to see if there's any malicious activity at the ends of any of these links, because what their biggest concern is, again, is preventing any data being stolen through any kind of loophole. For those of you who know, there's been a lot of data breaches in recent years where people's personal data has been stolen. Oftentimes, the loophole that is used to get access to that data comes through an email or a phishing scam. Another example of one you might commonly see would be something like Proofpoint. Proofpoint is often employed by these hospital systems as well for doing this link checking. So what does this non-human traffic look like? It very much is going to look like all the links were clicked all at once, or several of the links were clicked all at once. And it's going to occur even without an open of the email. So the images won't be downloaded, but you'll see, say you sent 100 emails over to a hospital system. The emails will land, go into the filtering system, and every email will get 35 clicks in 1 second. Obviously not something that can happen in real life.
And
Yes.
Jared, this will happen even if the hospital has been whitelisted for you.
Yeah.
This will happen even in those scenarios.
Yes, this will happen even if you are whitelisted. And so it presents a problem for us from a reporting standpoint, right? And we have current cases of this going on where we're working with clients who are doing their own sending, and they come back and they say, man, I had a campaign that went out and I got a 12% open rate, but a 55% click rate. And we take a look at their campaign metrics and see that, in fact, they are seeing this non-human traffic. And it will occur no matter what the scenario is, Sarah. If you make it past, for a lot of these hospitals, they've employed this, and your email gets into the system, gets past the outer firewall, and then this occurs. Yeah. So what we end up having to do here is put some filters in place for our reporting. That's really what the end result of this is we're going to have to put some filters in place. And for DMD, we've put some very aggressive filters in place to filter out this non-human traffic. Your ESP, if you have a high-end ESP, something along the lines of Oracle or Adobe, it's going to have some filters to handle this non-human traffic. Some of the middle and lower tier ones won't have anything at all, but they're going to be more liberal. because they want to make sure that you get absolutely every ounce of potentially valid interaction data in. We've taken more of the approach of we don't want you to get any non-human traffic in. So we have a pretty aggressive filtering system for this. But it requires, either you to write your own filtering or for you to use somebody who already has filters in place to handle it. And I think what's really important here is that this can accidentally, if we don't address it, give us the impression that we're doing better than we are. Or if we're doing something like triggering or automated campaigns, it could inadvertently cause us to take the next step in one of those triggered campaigns or automated campaigns when we actually shouldn't. So again, the place to look here is to go back and look at your campaign metrics and after campaign reporting to see, do you have inflated click-through rates due to some of these hospitals with their NHT?
Well, and that's something at DMD, right, that your team has worked diligently on creating a lot of logic to try and resolve in terms of the reporting. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And we are at a place where I can confidently say that we are 100% filtering out all the non-human traffic on a regular basis. But it requires also constant changes and updates because, no one of these necessarily looks exactly the same as another. They're very much infinitely configurable by the hospital system. So we've had to write a lot of logic, Sarah, in order to make this work. But I think we're in a very good place with it. One of the other new emerging trends, which we actually haven't yet seen in healthcare email, but we are starting to see it. We know we see it, and I hear about it and talk about it on message boards and forums, is non-human traffic occurring at the personal ISPs, particularly the webmail ones. And these are a variety of different kinds of bots that can be used. There are some good ones that are used for security. And there are some good ones that come out of things like, inbox aggregators, for example. But there's been a rise in webmail of bad bots that are used to mimic human behavior. And these are really there to steal coupon codes, which is why they don't touch healthcare email at this point, because they likely comb through it, but they don't do any link clicking because there's no value to them, to these bots. But in the retail world, they're stealing people's coupon codes, gathering personal information and things like that. And I think it is only a matter of time, because this is, again, a trend that has just really started to emerge within the last 6 months. There is a good chance we will start to see some non-human traffic, even in healthcare email, in the personal email space. So it's something we're keeping our eye on. We're ready for it at any moment if we start to see it. But, I think it potentially is going to be a problem.
So Jared, given the issues with relational filters and hospital filters and bot traffic, does it make sense? We've got a lot of marketers on the call today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, should we just stop sending images and emails? Should we only send text emails? Don't even send, send very light emails. Like and I know we're going to get into more details about the recommendation, but it sounds like plain emails are better.
Yeah, that's interesting, Sarah. I don't think the answer is to strip all the images out of an email or to strip all the content out of the email. What I think is really the solution is to start to look at, when I send emails, say to my friends or my parents, I still do send images, but I certainly don't lead off with a giant header graphic, right? So it's going to be adjustments that look more like that. We're going to have to maybe adjust and start out with text at the top of the email. We're going to have to add more personal elements and things like that. But I don't think the right answer is to pull up on email. I don't think the right answer is to say I'm going to go to text-only email. I think that the answer is possibly just to make some good positive adjustments to how we lay them out and design them. So, and that leads perfectly into this next slide, which is we have the same goals we've always had, I believe. But I think we've come to a spot now where we have much higher stakes than we once had, which is why this is important. And I think we've always wanted to, create a really good experience for end users every time. I think that's usually the goal we start out with. And I think all of us would really love to create and maintain opportunities for interaction within our email or within our website, different things like that. But the stakes here are exceptionally higher now than they were 6 months ago, because now, previously our stakes were, if we did not do these things, we might get a lower than anticipated open rate or a lower than anticipated click rate, or we'd be disappointed in our campaign. Or we might, slowly lose people because they might unsubscribe from us, or we might condition a negative response from them. Today, the stakes are, if we do not do these things well and we do not do them consistently, we may get blocked from ever seeing the end user's inbox. And that's a really bad scenario. So obviously, if we're starting off a new campaign, then our goal has to be really to create a great first impression. We need to plan ahead of time for the fact that we're going to bring absolutely the best content to bear up front, the most engaging content we can possibly put in front of them when we start out. For those of us who might have been sending to an audience for a long time, I think that's probably the scenario a lot of us are in. We may need to pull up and look at how can we re-engage people who are not interacting with our email. Is there something new we could provide for them? Potentially it's going to be a little bit of a long road, but we're going to have to make some changes and maybe reintroduce ourselves in order to get a great first impression. So, we've got these two big obstacles, and I think we really have one major solution here, which is to really make it personal. And when I talk about that, we're going to dive into each one of these topics now as we look at the solutions. At the hospital side of things, we may not have an opportunity there. If we find out that we are flat out blocked at some of the hospital systems, we can start a conversation about whitelisting. If we're doing our own sending, we could go to somebody who already has whitelist relationships. But in the meantime, I think we really have to look at the personal email addresses, because even though it's gotten more challenging at Gmail, Yahoo, and AOL, at least we have a shot. And so, if we do things right there, we potentially have the opportunity to get a really deep and good and engaging relationship going. As we look at the emails themselves, I think we're going to have to look at the typical ways that we would personalize email. It's shocking to me that there are still several emails I see every day that we're sending on behalf of clients that have no personalization in them. They don't have a personalized salutation or personalization in the pre-header or subject line. Now, we've always talked about these things in terms of, bolstering engagement, but now we have to talk about them in terms of getting us into the inbox. So I think as a first step, we have to regroup and say, okay, we need to get some personalization into these emails. The next level, we're really going to want to personalize content. Then we're going to want to make sure we get that personalized content in front of the end user at exactly the right time. So we look at things like send time optimization. We may need to pull in some second or third party data in order to help us create really personalized content. And then, for those of us who have been sending for a long time, it's probably going to be about bringing some better interactive content to bear. Things such as video and email. Or, I think this last one is a really innovative point, and we're going to dive into it very deeply. But, is there a way for us to get some transactional email going in order to, as we would call it, wash our promotional email? So let's dive in on some of this. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because I think again, it's something we should have always all been doing. But this study that DMD conducted shows the power of personalization in subject lines and pre-headers. And we have always seen overwhelmingly that adding some personalization when appropriate does bolster open rates. But again, today the stakes have changed. So now it's not just, do we want to bolster, engagement rates? What we're looking at here is, if we don't personalize and personalize appropriately, are we even going to get into the inbox? And so we definitely want to be adding these personalization elements to our subject lines and pre-headers. My favorite is to add it to the pre-header. So I like to keep my subject lines short. When we design and develop emails, we try to keep our subject lines short because we find that to be also a very powerful driver of interaction. So we've gone largely to personalizing the pre-header. Obviously you can personalize with first name and last name. That's typically the most common. But you can personalize with any demographic data, specialty, location, all of those kind of things. Anything basically you have in your demographic data could be used for personalization. And we love to see personalization go throughout the email. So, again, salutation. Also important to think about here is, wanting to have a signature line, a valid signature line that appears not necessarily to just be an organization. So if you have a representative at your organization whose signature you can use, that's also a powerful driver because it feels very personal. And as well as Sarah brought up, for a lot of us, we oftentimes on a marketing email will start out with a large graphic at the top, banner. We could definitely still have that banner, but it would be much better to start out with some HTML text at the top, whether that's in the form of a header or whatnot. But leading off with text is going to help us appear more personal as well. The next thing I want to take a look at here is delivering at the personal right time. So send time optimization is not a brand new concept. It's been around for several years, although I will say that there have been a lot of advancements to send time optimization in the last couple of years because artificial intelligence and machine learning have gotten a lot better and smarter. But the purpose of send time optimization is to take machine learning and look at the probability of the next best time that a person will open an email. And these send time optimization programs can be set up on a 24-hour clock, or they can be set up on a 7-day clock. And it literally is going to break each person on your target list out and look at the best probable time for them to open an email. And so DMD has this available to any of our customers on our deployments. We have it programmed into our system. Most of the large tier ESPs, whether they offer it as part of their out-of-the-box solution or whether you can get it from a third party, there are several that you can. Some of them require you to have something custom programmed, but it is something you definitely, if you're doing your own sending, you want to ask your ESP about send time optimization, because it is truly important to be there at the right moment. If you're not able to do that, I think there's some good directional data available. This is data that comes from a report that we make available to any of our customers, which if you look at this, just to give you some kind of background on this, the darker the green, the better the time. This is looking at all healthcare providers, all specialties over the last year of DMD email sending. And I think what's interesting here, again, when we think about when is the right time to get to the inbox, well, traditionally speaking, retail, they would say you want to be there first thing in the morning, particularly Tuesday and Thursday morning. But what we actually see is that healthcare providers are not like everyone else. They oftentimes are going to be opening their email in the afternoon. So, again, if we're really trying to get that engagement and we're not going to be able to do send time optimization, we probably want to shift then and make sure that we're at least sending at the best time, which in this particular case would be, between 2 and 7 p.m. Absolute best is Thursday, but Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday are going to be those hot spots where we're going to really want to try to get into their inbox. One of the other solutions to this is, again, to take a look at triggering email. Again, not a brand new concept. Triggering email is not a brand new concept, but it's a very important concept as we think about kind of the mix here. When we look at triggered email at DMD, we typically look at it from a perspective of AIM triggered email. So AIM is our personal identity product that we offer. It allows us to identify physicians all over the healthcare ecosystem. We have AIM readers installed on over 800 web properties, again, largely in the healthcare space, almost exclusively, from journals to pharma sites and healthcare related social media networks all over the place, right? So we would look at it typically from that perspective, but you could look at it from any different perspective, including maybe you have tracking on your own website and you're set up to do some triggered email. The great thing about triggered email here is obviously if a physician is visiting your site and you know what they're reading about, then you are able to immediately send them an email, whether it's an hour later or 2 hours later. And the reason that this is obviously so powerful is that you know that a certain topic on your website was relevant to them. And so when we look at setting up these triggered programs and combining them with personalization and combining them with personal content, and then even the send time optimization, we're able to truly deliver that right message to the right healthcare provider at the right moment. As well, we can start to look at, do we want to pull in some of the information from a second or third party in terms of data from around the web. What have they been doing in other places on the internet? And again, this gives us some additional campaign triggered email opportunities. Some of these could even be done in a non-automated fashion. If you were taking a look at data of where your target audience had been in the last month, and you knew what they'd been reading about from a healthcare perspective, you could theoretically queue up a campaign using dynamic content to push the right kind of information relative to what they've been reading about. And then again, send it through send time optimization with some personal elements and potentially get a lot more engagement out of it. So as we move on from that and we look at, what are some of the more engaging types of content? So again, if you're not doing triggered email today, that's something we'd love to talk to you about. But, if you're not doing triggered email today, I would think it's something you want to think about doing. One of the things you could put into that triggered email would be video. And again, if you've been sending for months and you're starting to see a slide in engagement, and now you're starting to think about potentially having a non-responder campaign, video and email would be a great thing to add in. Or if you're about to launch a new brand, new product, new service line, maybe you've got a new center that's opening up at your hospital, a good place to start is going to be video and email, because we see significantly higher open and click-through rates and engagement rates with video emails. Now, traditionally speaking, video and email has always been done by sending people to a landing page with your video on it. And even up through last year, all the way through last year, even with new technologies available, that would have still been my recommendation. Because I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of effort involved in creating an embedded video email. And there's been a lot of non-eloquent solutions for this in the last couple of years. It originally started out, you can put an animated GIF in your email that will redirect to the video, but that didn't support sound. And so that was a not great experience. But today now we have the possibility of doing actual playable video in an email. And that's done through HTML5. And it creates this really great wow factor. It creates this great sense of intimacy because you have an actual person talking in the email. You can convey a lot of information in a short period of time. And quite honestly, because we're competing in an inbox that's full of email from, top retailers and other places, a lot of them are pushing video content in email. And so we see that the engagement rates with these video emails is significantly higher. Now, I have to say here that it's not supported everywhere. So it's not supported, for example, in Outlook. And that may seem like a huge drawback at first. But what we do know is it's supported everywhere in Apple devices. And one of the other things DMD knows from doing all the sending and gathering all this information is that about 75% of any given audience is going to be on an Apple device. So there is a large population of people who are going to be able to see your video email if you send it to them and they open it on their iPhone or iPad or their Apple computer. And then we just have to realize that we're going to have to put a bunch of effort into the fact that we may have to create a second version of the email or do some very complex responsive design to handle those people who do not have an Apple device. Now, again, this sounds like a lot of work. And previously, I would have said it was too much work. But because the upside is so high, I think at this point, as they would say, the juice is worth the squeeze. And so what we are telling people and what we are seeing is that people who are embedding video in their emails are getting significantly higher open and click rates on those emails. And so I would highly recommend that if you are not considering this, that it be something you really consider adding to your marketing mix. And it's especially important for those of you who are possibly considering a non-responder campaign or are considering possibly having to pull up and start over with somebody like Yahoo or Gmail, because this kind of content will be very valuable there.
Jared, before you move on, what guidance would you give for length of video? Any additional guidance you give in terms of driving to longer video, or how would we go about incorporating video into an email?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Sarah. I think naturally we want to push our whole video out in an email. And the good news here is the video doesn't take up any file size in the email, in an HTML5 email. However, I think from an engagement standpoint, I would say 2 minutes is about the maximum. So if you had a really long video that you wanted to push someone to, I might create almost like a teaser trailer, and then link them to the longer video or break it up into smaller sections. I would not push past 2 minutes in the video email, just because one of the other trends we've definitely seen in the last couple of years is the time people spend with email has gotten shorter. It just, people are much busier. They have much busier inboxes. And so I would hate to see you, put some really great video content out there that's like half an hour long, and all you're seeing is that people are watching 2 minutes of it and then dropping off. So.
Sure. And what would you consider significantly higher? You use the term significantly higher open rates. I mean, for you, what is there a way to, quantify that at this time? What would you put out there in terms of better open rates?
Sure. From an open rate perspective, we see 5 and 8% higher open rates, right? It's a lot higher. But then the click rates, sometimes are double. So that's significantly higher, really, really significantly higher. Now, again, if you're going to put video in your email, I would recommend something in the subject line that indicates it's video, video : and then your subject line. Because I think one of the biggest mistakes I've seen is that people will put video content in their email, but there's no clear call in the subject line that this is going to be a video. And I think that's a huge missed opportunity, because you will see significantly higher open rates, especially if people know they're going to a video. All right, final topic, and this one's a fun one. I'm really excited about this. So transactional email, what is it and how can we potentially use it? A transactional email is any email that arises or is sent as a result of customer user-initiated action with your product or brand. We get transactional email all day long. I threw an example here of Amazon up. You can see this is an order confirmation that they sent me. And basically what's required here is that somebody is just transacting with you. And then you're well within your right relative to that transaction to send them email. The great thing about it is that canned spam doesn't apply to it. You don't even technically have to have an opt-out on a transactional email. If you have access to it, you can actually set up a transactional IP or domain. DMD has one of these, and you actually flag it as this is going to be transactional email only. Those transactional IPs and domains get inboxed at almost 100% rate. And the reason for this, again, is if you think about something, Sarah had brought this up when we were talking about transactional email earlier, like imagine the scenario where you order plane tickets and then they aren't able to deliver your plane ticket to you, right? I mean, that can't happen. They have to be able to deliver that. So as long as you abide by the rules of transactional email, it will get inboxed at almost 100% rate. And that is maybe the only one caveat to this, is there are some pretty strict rules around it. So you have a 30-70 rule. And basically that means that 70% of this email has to be transactional. So you can see in the example I threw up here from Amazon, all of the stuff other than the red box and their logo is purely transactional. It's related to the transaction that has taken place. You are allowed this 30% promotion, and Amazon does this very effectively. The airlines do this very effectively. They'll have this little box or area where they promote one of their other products or other things that you might be interested in. Or, when I think about the airlines, it's, do you want a first class upgrade or things like that. And so this is, it's a cool thing. And the most common response I get when I bring this topic up is, well, I can't do transactional email. But I think that's actually not true. And I'm going to show you why. The example I'm going to use here is pharma. And we are doing some of this already and starting to do it. So I think we absolutely can. If you have prescriber data, meaning who is prescribing your product, then they are transacting with your brand. And I say that because the FDA says that's true. If you're ever required to send a Dear HCP letter, the Dear HCP letters are transactional emails. They're considered transactional emails. So the FDA says you have a relationship if you have prescribers. And so, I think we're all well within our right, provided we have accurate prescribing data. So if we have that prescribing data, then we can literally take one of our promotional emails, and you can see I just had a mock-up done here of what this would look like. Pulling out the vast majority of the promotional material, again, the big banner, the branding, changing the CTAs, changing the text around a little bit. You can see the net result there on the right, and then you can see I've had them, put the transactional component in red and the promotional component in green, and we get to this 70-30 ratio here. Taking a deeper look at a very, again, realistic example here, we've got this dosing resources email. So we've got people we know they're prescribing, or they've prescribed at least once. In the email itself, we're going to say, hey, thank you for prescribing. Here's some dosing resources to help you, better service the product. We're going to send it only to those prescribers. Now, this is great because with your prescribers, this is going to keep the brand top of mind. Now, you might say to me, well, that's great. Those people are already prescribing my product. So, what about those people who are not prescribing my product, the people that I really want to reach? Here's the great thing about transactional email. Transactional email enhances the inboxing of all the emails you send. So as long as you send off your transactional IP using the same from that you send your promotional email off of on your promotional IP address, the transactional emails that are getting delivered at the 100% inbox rate and are getting opened and read and everything else at a great rate are actually going to help your promotional emails on your promotional IP get delivered to the inbox, get looked at, and get read. Because, if you think about this, right, like when do you not get an email from Amazon? Even their promotional emails always go to your inbox, right? And the reason is that one of the big factors that's being looked at there is your promotional and transactional mix. So it may not initially seem like the best investment of time and money, but when you think about being able to deliver your promotional email at an exceptionally high rate, having these transactional emails to wash that promotional email is a great investment in terms of getting to the inbox.
Jared, just to make sure, I want to summarize a little bit what you're saying so that it's clear. So you're saying that first, not only can a transactional email incorporate some marketing info, but that also, if you send out transactional email, it will improve your promotional email performance.
That is absolutely correct, Sarah. So yeah, what I am basically saying here is that if you are doing a good job with transactional email, you have transactional IPs, yes, you can send 30% of it can still be promotional, as long as you have those transactions. And then it will help you get inboxed at a significantly higher rate, even on your promotional messages sent on your promotional IP, provided you use the same friendly from line when you do the sending. Yeah. So it is a fantastic opportunity for us to get better inbox placement and to get our messages in front of the healthcare providers, both that are already prescribing and the ones who are not prescribing. And this isn't a pharma only thing. Hospitals have a lot of opportunity here with different transactional opportunities. I just picked a pharma one out for this particular webinar, but there are opportunities across the board for this. And with that, we're going to take questions. Look at that. I left time for questions. That's wonderful.
Always a good thing. I'm going to put a poll up just to ask for everyone's feedback on today's presentation. If you don't get a chance to respond to the poll, we'll also send out an email with asking for your feedback. So I do have a couple questions. Let me just launch this poll here and then get back to Q&A. I think here is one question. With regards to, like, for example, response to a video view, would that be considered transactional?
Yeah, so that's tricky. I think that one depends on the scenario. Now, traditionally speaking, it would not be. But, depending on the legal read on that, depends on what the video particularly was doing. I think the ultimate one for pharma is always going to be that they have prescribed your product. A video view would definitely be interaction with your website or with your brand, but it's likely not going to qualify as a transaction for transactional purposes.
Okay, thank you. Just sorry, getting back to the list here. I think one of the things that came up in some of the earlier questions, when looking at, for example, Amazon's email and some of that dynamic content that pulls in based on your behaviors, I think that's something that we see in all of our emails. How do companies do that? What programs are used to pull in those dynamic features? How is that typically handled on the email side?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Sarah. So, most of the marketing automation platforms are going to allow for some amount of dynamic content. I know all of ours do. And, there's a lot of different ways to attack that. So most of those retail ones, right, they're going to have a product library, which is going to include an image and a brief description, and they're going to house those product libraries in their database. And then the email's basically built out such that it has 3 or 4 slots for product library items, and at the time of send it's going to pick based on whatever algorithm they've put in place the right 3 products from the library to put in there. Now I think obviously that retail example doesn't translate perfectly for us, but I do think when we look at setting up these triggered campaigns, and we do quite a few of them, we're taking potentially like that AIM data. A lot of times with the stuff that comes from all over the ecosystem. And, we're going to say, if they have this condition, like if they viewed this in the last 2 weeks, then we're going to push them this content. If they viewed this in the last 2 weeks, we're going to push them this content. And then really what we have there is just a paragraph of text and an image, or maybe just a paragraph of text and a field in the email for that dynamic content. So it's similar but not exactly the same, but I do think it's again exceptionally valuable in terms of an opportunity for us to have really personal content. Because if we think about what is somebody going to engage with, well, certainly if they were just looking up recent advancements in oncology treatments, and you saw that they were looking that up on like NJM 3 days ago, and you happen to have an oncology product that's relatively new, it would be a great opportunity to be there with some dynamic content related to what they were just reading. The biggest challenge there is going to be getting the content developed and having enough of it available, for that kind of triggered scenario. But we do see people successfully doing this all the time.
Thank you. One of our, we do have a wide audience for these webinars, and so I have one specific for the pharma group. Often having to send out Dear HCP letters, and this questioner is asking, when talking about the transactional emails and taking that approach, that does not include Dear HCP letters, correct?
You can send a Dear HCP letter as a transactional email, provided you do not put, in it too much promotional material in it, which almost, they never do, right? So that
right.
can be a transactional.
No marketing promotions in
right.
promotions in a Dear HCP letter. Right. Okay, but you can send it as a transactional email.
You can send that down a transactional pipeline. Yes, that would qualify for a transactional pipeline. It's a required. One of the other things that transactional pipelines can be used for is any kind of required email, right? So think about, for example, Amazon. Even if you signed up with Amazon but you never bought anything for them, but they make an update to their privacy policy and they're required by law to notify you of it, they are allowed to send that. You are allowed to send that down the transactional IP address, right? Because they want to see 100% delivery of it. So a Dear HCP letter should always go down a transactional pipeline because it's a required communication. Now, I know some organizations will send Dear HCP style emails voluntarily. It's not it hasn't been required of them necessarily at that time, but they will send something like that. That could be a gray area, although I would argue that, that is also a transactional email. We're looking at the content. They're not promoting anything. They're notifying people of something. And especially in a case where it is FDA mandated, then it is absolutely transactional.
Do you have any recommendations for marketing automation platforms? Like, what would you put out there in terms of, and I think this is perhaps thinking back to the filters and the things that are kind of baked into some of these, I think there's probably a wide range of performance of some of these automation platforms.
Absolutely. So, yes, I do. I certainly have some recommendations there. So bias, because they're the platforms we use. I'm very biased towards Adobe Campaign. I'm very biased towards Oracle Responses, and I'm very biased towards IBM Watson Marketing Cloud, because we use all three of those, and they're great. But I will also give a good shout out to ExactTarget, which is now Salesforce Marketing Cloud, particularly their ExactTarget product. Those would all be top tier. At the middle tier, I'm a big fan of Eloqua, and I'm a big fan of Pardot. And then at the low tier, I'm a big fan of Emma. Sort of if you're just getting off the ground, I prefer Emma to say MailChimp or Constant Contact. So those would be my marketing automation platform recommendations, particularly.
Thank you. Thank you. So with transactional emails, going back to transactional emails, can they be sent by a batch? Do they have to be individual? Are there any deployment requirements besides a separate domain?
No, they can be sent as a batch. Yes, in fact, you would send it just like any other email. The real requirement, again, is that you have a transaction and that you've truly abided by that 30/70 rule. So I know, in the retail world, like the legal teams usually have to review each and every transactional email, and they will literally measure them. That's why I had those, red and green boxes put on those emails. We did an actual measurement, pixel measurement. You just really have to abide by that 30/70 rule. Because then the bad scenario here would be you get a transactional IP up and you send some promotional email down it. You will get shut down almost immediately by the ISPs. They will take offense to the fact that you've sent some promotional email down a transactional IP. So, again, it's just really, you really have to be ready to deal with, I'm going to measure these things and make sure they're 100% transactional. And you need to have, some evidence on your end to back up the fact that you have a transaction. So again, in the pharma space, I would say the best measure there is you have prescribers. You have people that you can prove prescribing data on.
Sure. I mean, I think so often, DMD, we default a little bit on things like prescribers, physicians, because that's kind of where we got our start, but we also support the consumer space. So, I think a lot of our marketers on this call also look to reach out to patients as well. So do these recommendations, this guidance, does it apply to patient emails as well?
Absolutely, provided, again, you have proof, that they're, for example, consuming the product, right? So as if there's any kind of transaction that has occurred with your brand, legitimate transaction that has occurred with your brand, then absolutely yes, you can send them a transaction email. Okay.
Final question, and then we'll call it. For embedded videos and email, are there any drawbacks to the reporting or tracking? What can you do? What can't you do?
Yeah, so you will get click data, especially if you don't have the video autoplay, you'll get a click. Obviously, if the bulk of the interaction's taking place in the email, you're not going to get that web hop. If you are having them redirect over, you'll get all the same data as normal. But there's no specific limitation to the reporting in there. You will get time on email for all the time that they spend watching the video, when everything else basically plays out the same.
But it's time on email, it won't necessarily tell you the markers of the video where someone dropped off in viewing the video.
Correct. It will not, because it is literally, it's the video does not ride along in the email. The video is still, being linked off the web wherever you've got it hosted, YouTube or Vimeo or wherever. You will get view data there because the video is being played through that, that page that it's hosted on. But yeah, you will not get that kind of data in the email.
Thanks, Jared. I do want to remind folks that the slides from today are in the handout section, as well as the slides from the webinar we ran on deliverability in February. So go to the handouts, download them. I'll leave the webinar up a little bit after we end the recording, just so you can download those. And then following today's presentation, you'll get an email with a link to the recorded version of this session. Usually that happens within an hour or two after the event, just however long it takes to, zip up the recording. And with that, I think we have answered all of our questions today. And just a little bit over. So really, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jared, for presenting this topic for us. And thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much.